This is September 29th, 2015. We are at the Savile Club in London. Tom, you once said that your whole life was waiting for questions for which you have prepared answers. I hope that won't be the case today.
Well, I don't have one prepared for that one. I said that, did I?
You did, yes.
Really? How interesting.
The play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead was first performed at the Edinburgh Festival in 1966.
Yep.
An earlier draft was entitled Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Meet King Lear.
Yeah, that wasn't in fact a whole play by any means. It was a sketch that I wrote in 1964. And yeah, it was a little comedy, 10 pages, I think.
How did Lear figure into it?
Lear figured into it because at that time I was thinking there might be a play in what happened to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern after Rosgill, to save footage, while they were in England. It just seemed like a thought that the King of England at that time might be Lear. So I had two plays to draw on. And, you know, we were all in this house outside Berlin, promising young writers, courtesy of the Ford Foundation, among others. And we all did a graduation piece. We were there for some months in 1964. And we all did a graduation piece, Derek Marlowe, Piers Paul Reed and I, among others. And that was mine.
But you changed it, obviously.
Yes, I think I actually binned it. I don't think I have a copy. I don't think there is one.
As early as 1968, you and John Boorman were toying with the idea of turning the play into a movie, which was long before actually the film got made. What were you and Boorman cooking up at that time?
We weren't actually cooking up very much. He rather left it to me. I had no idea how to write a film script from the play. In fact, I simply transcribed the play with very, very elaborate stage directions involving acres of floor made out like chessboards. I don't remember much about it. I don't even remember if it was John's initiative. I think it probably was. And an American agent, whose name I really can't remember, sort of temporary freelance agent, pitched the film to the studio, which I believe was MGM. So successfully.
They wound up making the MGM wound up making the movie.
Did they?
Or being involved in the licensing of the rights to the movie.
Oh, really?
They had the rights.
Well, it wasn't the same MGM, I don't think, because what happened, they bought the rights to make the film, and then there was a change of regime at MGM, and nothing more was heard of the film. But not before I'd had a very nice recce to Elsinore, which was, I forget how it happened, but anyway, I turned up at Elsinore and also recce'd Scandinavian castles here and there, and then would ask MGM to pay for my films and hotel. In those innocent days, I think they did. But it didn't last very long as an effort to make a movie of this play. And John went on to do other things.
So then 20 years later, you decided not only to adapt the play and write the screenplay for it, but also to direct it.
No, that's not how I put it at all, Michael. You decided, among others. And furthermore, I don't know if you remember this, but I had a list of directors. We were trying to find,
Yes.
who should be. John Boorman was on this list, of course.
Yes.
And not to make a great meal of this point, but my recollection is that for paradoxical reasons, which I half understand, it was easier to get the money if I directed it myself, because I'd never directed a film before, and the idea of a sort of author-director thing happening. I think also that if you've never directed a film before, there is the outside chance that you'll turn out to be Orson Welles. If you have directed a film before, they realize you're not Orson Welles, but before that point, they may be slightly more open with the purse strings, and indeed, that's what happened. I distinctly remember somebody saying, well, it would just be sexier if you did it. I had no directorial ambitions. I've never directed anything since. And I was carried very comfortably through the film by this wonderful crew, this A-list of Peter Bijou and Mike Roberts and everybody else. And it was tremendously enjoyable. I made the mistake of saying at a press lunch, about 3 years later, when it was opening and everything, I made the mistake of saying I found the whole thing very enjoyable, and was absolutely mortified to find this coming out in the papers that I found the whole thing very easy, which is not really the same thing. It was difficult.
What do you remember about the process that was difficult?
Well, I'm surprised you need reminding about this, because at a certain point you showed up somewhere by my elbow. I think I've been shooting the thing for about 10 days, and you said, I noticed you haven't moved the camera yet. Well, I hadn't noticed that at all. I hadn't sort of thought about the camera moving, which was a whole new dimension to filmmaking, which hadn't occurred to me. I mustn't actually make light of this, because we were all on our toes, trying to be imaginative and alert and creative. And yes, a huge amount of effort and thought was being put into every day's work. But as it happens, I hadn't moved the camera. Everything up to that point had been from, a static angle. Peter Bijou, I remember, he was very quick and decisive, and he was a godsend, because before we got going, I asked friends like Terry Gilliam, how do I choose a DP? I don't understand anything. And Terry said, well, look, you've seen a lot of movies. Which one would you like your movie to look like? Would you like it to look like Lassie Come Home, or would you like it to look like Bergman? And I thought, oh, I see, yes, that's good. So somehow I arrived at a list of 3 or 4, and Peter Bijou was able to make it. It was a sort of rather satisfyingly, it wasn't exactly, I'm not saying that we were improvising our way through the shoot, but there was something nicely amateurish for me about it. In England we have a tradition, an amateur tradition, which we're quite proud of. And although I was surrounded by professionals, I didn't feel like a professional. Also, by the way, I should say this. I'll stop talking at some point, I expect, but before I do, I should say that there was another good reason for me to be a sort of writer-director. It simply wasn't possible that anybody else could do the screenplay, because they would defend the play too much on the one hand, or simply not get the play through the transformation on the other hand. And I sort of realized quite early on that if it was to be a film, and it really was not my, it wasn't my initiative. I wasn't thinking, oh my God, I really must make a film from Rosencrantz. On the contrary, I didn't see any reason why anybody should. But then I was quite intrigued by doing it once it had been proposed. And not long after that, it seemed pretty clear that, firstly, I wouldn't trust anybody else to muck about with my play. And secondly, it needed mucking about with. And that's how I turned out to be the first choice for adapter. And then there were other reasons, as I mentioned, why I turned out to be first choice as director.
I remember you telling me that by way of preparation to direct, you spent a day on Mike Nichols' Working Girls set as an observer.
Oh, really?
Do you remember that?
I don't, actually. Are you sure it was Working Girls? Yeah, it might have been.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I never actually. I doubt very much I learned anything, but I did learn something from Mike as a theatre director, because I was in the stalls one day when he was doing my play The Real Thing, and a big man walked to the middle of the stage during the tech rehearsal, holding a chair in each hand. He shouted into the auditorium, "Mike, which chair?" Mike said, "That one." And I was thinking, oh my God, I'll never be a director. I mean, the chairs weren't that different, really. And so afterwards, when the man had gone, and I said, why actually? He said, listen, it doesn't matter. You just have to say instantly. It doesn't matter which you choose. You can change your mind later. But what you shouldn't do is hesitate. So that was possibly a lesson for a director. But I don't know that I acted upon it. I hope I didn't dither around too much.
You didn't. In hindsight, are you satisfied with how the movie turned out? Was there anything you would have done differently?
I would have made it shorter. I watched it for the first time for years the other night. The things I was really gladdened by were certainly Tim's performance, Gary's performance. In fact, the performances. I liked the way also that the visual language changed from time to time. So that when you got the troupe in their masks, for instance, later on, it was just a completely different look. And what I really would have liked enormously to do would be to shorten the front of the film as far as the moment when you switch to interior Elsinore with Iain Glen as Hamlet coming through that curtain. I'd like to have got there 5 minutes quicker. The other thing, there were other things, broadly speaking, I thought it was sort of okay. I watched it with my wife who'd never seen it, and it worked pretty well. There were, of course, bits of the film where one would have loved to have had a little more money to do the scene. Do you remember when the bowsprit of the boat crashes through during the pirate storm and so forth, and Gary's lying in his bunk, and this naked lady carved from wood sort of just slides up his body while the storm is raging and the pirates are jumping around. We never see a pirate, as it turns out. I thought, considering how little we had to work with, the designer and everybody involved in the movie did remarkable things. And I'd forgotten how we'd solved these situations sometimes. And I was kind of sitting there, this is like a week ago, thinking, my God, how are we going to do that? And then I'd be shown and thought, oh, that's what we did. Well, that wasn't bad. A bit more money, a bit more time, and I would like to have been possibly offering you the only director's cut in the history of cinema which was shorter than the producer's cut. Apart from that, this is fine.
The film won the Golden Lion Best Picture Award at the 1990 Venice Film Festival. The chairman of the judges, Gore Vidal, had this to say about the play, about the movie. Language has been so debased in this century that it is very difficult to communicate anything complex at all in life or in art. The prize I am about to give is a tribute to the force of the mind, of wit, and of logic in human affairs. Do you remember that?
No.
What,
I mean, I remember that Gore liked the film and was responsible, really, as chairman, I guess, for the mood swinging in his favor. I think the Italian press were absolutely furious, weren't they?
well,
Yeah, we were up against
about
something
Goodfellas.
amazingly good. What was it?
Goodfellas,
What?
the Scorsese movie, Goodfellas.
Oh, indeed, yeah. We were, in fact, we were in competition. After Rosencrantz won the Golden Lion, there was a kind of reception somewhere. And there was Martin and his family, and they were, the atmosphere was a bit cold. I was saying, listen, look, I would have voted for Goodfellas. Don't blame me. I didn't do this. And they cheered up a bit in the end. But God, they were cross. And of course, it's absurd to put a film like ours into competition with a film like Goodfellas. In a way, they both fall under the rubric of the movies. But the extreme kind of proficiency of Goodfellas, decades of Martin's experience and knowledge of the cinema, it all feeds into the movies he makes. And we were in a different ballpark, but we were playing the same game, we were told. And why people vote for this or that, whether it's a movie or a political party, the reasons for these votes going one way or the other way are sometimes whimsical and not value judgments.
To date, Rosengill is still the only one of your plays that's been adapted to film.
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, because they're plays is the short answer. What is the necessity for making them into films? You'd probably have to start by leaving a third of the play out, and then, with Rosencrantz, we were adding a strange sort of silent comedy, weren't we? Because he kept inventing things which hadn't been invented, like the hamburger and the aeroplane. I mean, even as I sit here thinking, what? But we did. Scott Rudin wrote to me every 6 months for about 10 years, saying, let's make a film of Arcadia. And about a year ago, I just thought, oh, okay, why not, having said no for 10 years. So in fact, I have written a script of Arcadia, and maybe it will be a film. I'm about to go into rehearsal with a play from the late 80s called Hapgood, which was also bought to make a film. And I said I'd have a go at that. And after about 3 days, well, frankly, I just gave the money back and said, I'm sorry, I can't. Why would a play work as a movie? Because with a play, you're trading on the physical limitations of the art form, the boundaries. You're trading on them. They aren't limitations. They're opportunities. You're exploiting the fact that it's a play in a theatre. So you're getting a lot of values out of that. And they lose their value if you're filming.
You did an adaptation also of Real Thing, as I remember.
I never did, actually. No, yeah, sometime in the late 80s, Sidney Pollack would come around to the house, and I say Sidney Pollack because he was the only person who actually said, look, let's make them all American. And I thought, well, at least that's something different, because it's really, really boring to go back to old work and kind of redo it and try to do it slightly different. And the older you get, the more important it seems not to go back to stuff you've done before and try and do one more new thing.
Have you ever had the desire to direct anything else?
No, well, actually, yes, because you did Raymond Chandler, didn't you?
Well, it was Bob Parker's, Robert B. Parker's take on Poodle Springs, I think it was.
It was Poodle Springs,
yeah.
which Chandler began before he died.
Yes, and Bob finished.
And Parker finished. My life wasn't such that I wanted to go to California and direct Poodle Springs. And it was done by a pretty classy director, Bob Rafelson, as you know. But actually, I kind of regret not doing that. It was the only time I felt later I knew what I wanted to do with that script. And I was kind of sorry. I just sort of it wasn't exactly laziness. It wasn't exactly timidity. It was just some kind of lack of freedom I had at that time to just push everything in my life aside and live with Poodle Springs for 12 weeks.
In Roz and Gil, the player states, we're actors, we're the opposite of people. What do you suppose he meant by that?
I suppose it's analogous to the other line about every entrance is an exit, every exit is an entrance somewhere else.
Right.
I connected with that line in my own mind. There's a private reference which isn't really supposed to be very helpful to the audience for Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, but there's somewhere it references a remark by somebody like not Mel Brooks. Who is?
Was Mel Brooks? Yes.
Was it?
Yes.
In The Producers.
In The Producers, Gene Wilder says something about actors are people, and Zero answers by saying, "Are they? Have you ever eaten with one?"
Is that right? Oh, yes. I remember it as much simpler, where he's complaining about the way he's treating them, and whoever it is says, "Listen, you can't behave like that. These are people." And he says, "No, they're not. They're actors."
I wondered if you were...
Same idea.
If that was the same idea. Yeah. So actors are frequently demeaned in that manner. Why is that? Is it because they're trouble to work with?
No, they don't have to be. I mean, everybody who deals with actors, that person has his or her own character. I'm very glad I'm not an actor. I'm slightly in awe of actors, feel very beholden to them, and on the whole, I am pretty timid about dealing with actors. Yeah. But we were supposed to, we kind of rehearsed this film with the principal actors, but it was kind of going through the motions a little bit. I didn't really want to rehearse scenes. I didn't quite see why we were rehearsing them, since I personally knew what was happening in the scenes. I'd written them. There's also an oddity about movie making in that films are seldom rehearsed at all and never adequately by people who think that they ought to be rehearsed. And there are many actors who, in movies I believe, I can think of one certainly, who have said that the rehearsal somehow dissipates that moment of discovery which you might be making on camera. And I can understand that. But thinking about, for example, Iain Glen doing his Hamlet scenes, particularly the one at that long table when he's, what a piece of work is a man, and so on. I think we rehearse that, and I think any actor who is playing Hamlet anyway, even if it's only in my play, would be doing a pretty thorough job of preparation. So what I'm saying is that one doesn't want actors to be just unprepared and not even think about the morning's work before they arrive. But I can kind of understand that that you have your best moments very often unexpectedly, and I can think of precedents in the theatre. I remember Peter Brook writing or speaking about the first time he was directing a major company. It was the RSC, and Peter Brook, you know, was about 12 years old. I mean, he was a prodigy. He was 20, I suppose. And he was very nervous doing it, so he got a Pollock's Toy Theatre and worked out all the kind of actors' moves. I think it was Measure for Measure, perhaps. Don't trust me, it may have been Love's Labour's Lost. But anyway, he did it all with these little cut-out, coloured stick figures. And then within a few minutes of starting work, it all got junked. It was all hopeless. It was all useless. That wasn't the way you discovered truthfulness in rehearsing a scene. I found Gary and Tim tremendously on side, and Richard too. But I was very wary of pushing them, and I know that Gary, when he was sort of sitting on the tomb doing sort of little kind of monologue thoughts about death and being dead, I don't think he ended up particularly satisfied, although we did it more often than I should have let him, actually. There's a point where you've done it, and the speech, that section of the film, meant a great deal to him, and he was very, very, whatever the opposite of casual is. He just wanted to do it for all time. And I remember him saying at one point, look, you know, why can't we have another take? This is the place where you can't change it. Once you've done it, it's your last chance. It's your only chance. So I'm sure we did one more take, and I don't suppose that was the take that we ended up using. There was something ineffably sweet about Gary's Rosencrantz. It was fun to figure things out the day before, thinking about what we're going to shoot tomorrow. That kind of, so it wasn't very pre-planned. I think we did 35 or 36 days in the end, didn't we? Yeah. I wouldn't want to do it again or do another play into a film. I wouldn't want to direct anything.
Speaking about actors, is there an actor or actors who you regard as prime interpreters of your work, whether it be in film or on stage?
I actually wrote a couple of plays with John Wood in mind. He died a year or two ago now. And I suppose he's an actor that I consciously wrote for, yeah.
Travesties, was it that you wrote?
Travesties was the play that, well, first of all, he played Guildenstern on Broadway,
Right.
with Brian Murray. And Travesties was a play I wrote for John. And even Jumpers, which was before Travesties, I was thinking John could do this. He was in the wrong theatre company, so he didn't do it. Michael Hordern did it, and Michael Hordern was rather wonderful. On the whole, I think I think I do write for actors, but only on, as it were, personal, emotional terms. Not because necessarily they're exactly the only. You know, they have the. One has the illusion that they're the only people who can do this one or that one. I definitely wrote Indian Ink for Felicity Kendall, but before that, nothing was written for anybody, as far as I remember. She did The Real Thing too, and Jumpers, but they weren't written for her. And I'm just trying to think about more recently, the rock and roll. No. I mean, Simon Russell Beale, who's definitely a favourite actor, he played Guildenstern at the National Theatre with Adrian Scarborough, who's another favourite. So sometimes they're very happy conjunctions, and you feel that you're in harmony with the production, the director, everything. And if you have a tough time trying to guide an actor into a certain interpretation, if that's all going wrong, I don't think you recover the ground.
You've written a surprisingly large number of screenplays, but they've
Have
all
I?
been adaptations.
Yes.
Why are there no original Stoppard screenplays?
I've never felt like that about film. I wanted to start. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to start writing for the stage at a time when the stage was particularly interesting in the British theatre. I've had as many ideas for a play as I've written. You know, I don't have a bottom drawer of half-baked ideas and half-finished plays. I've just used everything. I just wanted to work in the theatre, and that's what I did. Trying to sort of understand something in myself. It's as though I don't want to waste my idea on a movie. I think there's an element of that. Because there's no question about it. Unless you are... I can't imagine a circumstance in which a writer is properly in control of his script in the world of movies. Well, I can imagine one way: you pay for the film and that's that. But as long as there's a paymaster, you never quite, you don't quite have the final vote, the decisive vote on things. there are situations, there have been situations where, I mean, Shakespeare in Love, for example, was, you know, yeah, pretty much. I mean, I wrote it on the back of an earlier script called Shakespeare in Love, and in the final stages of that movie, I was arguing, you know, with the producer about just a phrase or two. And this happened with television too, with BBC, HBO. I did a thing called Parade's End. I ended up arguing, trying to persuade them to keep something which is generally felt by other people to be difficult to understand, and I'm saying no, it's not difficult to understand, honestly. And they say, well, it is for our audience or whatever. That kind of thing won't. I don't think that kind of thing would ever happen, at least in the theatre that I work in, the London Theatre, the British Theatre. Yeah.
So you don't take kindly to notes that you get from studio or network executives?
On the whole, you're ahead of them. You know, that's why they're executives. On the whole, you already know the problem to the note. But of course, every now and again, there's a bright idea to be welcomed coming in from somewhere. You know, there's no... The feeling a writer has in the theatre is quite different from the feeling a writer has about his role and his responsibility in the movie world. It's just... There's nothing wrong with it, but it's a different balance. And I'm not now so simple-minded as to think that theatre is what happens to texts, which is that was roughly my take on what it was to be a playwright. But it certainly would never be said and couldn't be said that movies are what happens to scripts, except in a pejorative sense. The writer-director is a concept which makes complete sense to me. In fact, it seems to me that the filmmaker, ideally, is the writer, and the writer, ideally, is the director. There's no special reason to have a separate author, separate from the filmmaker. If the filmmaker, you know, Billy Wilder, I guess, wrote a lot of the movies he made. So you think of directors like that as being the true authors of the films. It doesn't mean necessarily that the film is a good film or the script is a good script, but I think if you write a film and direct it, then it's more your film than anybody else's in that sense. I don't think that's true if you only direct or only write. In the theatre, if you've written a play, that's your play. It's really thought of as being your piece.
In an apparent echo of Gore Vidal's statement at Venice, you once defined movies as advanced technology in the service of retarded intellect.
No, it's arrested development, if you're going to quote me. Advanced technique in the service of arrested development. Sorry, yeah, I did say that. And it was at a time when it seemed, and it may still be the case, that about 80% of American film industry product was pitched at adolescents but sold to grown-ups. It's really hard to talk about without. It's very hard to avoid kind of condescension or some such word. There are films being made for grown-ups, of course there are, in every language. But in the case of American stroke British movies, it's like a publishing conglomerate which makes most of its money from comic books, and that's that.
Although uncredited, it's rumored that you wrote both Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and
yeah, well,
Star
I didn't,
Wars.
of course, no. I mean, they were all friends of mine, the people who were making these movies, and I definitely did some work. Well, on the with Stephen and Indiana Jones, I don't really remember how much, but I certainly helped out on that. It was really to do with Sean Connery. They offered the role of Harrison Ford's father to Sean Connery, and he said he'd like to do it, but he just didn't like his dialogue. And I think he suggested me, I'm not sure. So I did that. And I can't really remember. I remember chatting to George Lucas. I don't even know where we were about this next Star Wars thing, and I think he was writing it. Well, I don't know. I don't really, I don't really remember enough to be sure. But anyway, I did kind of read and change stuff I was being shown. I think I got paid for it too, so I think it was a proper job. What else? Which one did you say?
Well, one of the Star Wars movies.
That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't this era of Star Wars, because they're now making several new ones. It was back then.
It's ironic that you would work with two producer directors who so gave such little credence to the writers that invariably they felt writers were interchangeable and replaceable.
Well, maybe they are. I mean, you know, this is not something which applies to our film, but there's a way of conceiving of a film studio as a place where the end product is a movie, but what feeds into it are preconceptions about how it will be marketed, for example. I mean, I was involved in a film once which was about X, and they wanted it to be a bit more about Y, and with some X and some Y. And it was because the marketing people said, well, it's going to look like this on the poster, and that's as it were flavor of the film, whatever else is in it. I'm putting this badly because I don't want to kind of get into names and places and faces, but I can see that a studio is making a product of which it would be naive to say that it was the expression of what somebody is doing in his writer's garret 2 years earlier. It's just that's one of the things which feeds into the result.
You once said that maturity is a high price to pay for growing up.
No, I didn't.
You did?
No, I said age is a high price to pay for maturity.
And
I can prove it. It's actually, I did say this, I wrote it on the wall of somebody's dressing room about 100 years ago. It was a friend of mine who was in the first production of Hair. And then he sent me, or somebody sent me, the same words attributed to me, burned into a very attractive piece of timber in a botanical garden in Hawaii. I always felt this is precisely how life is supposed to go.
was it your experience as a drama critic that caused you to write plays? How did you come about writing plays?
It was more a case of wanting to be a writer, wanting to write, and I just happened to belong to that generation which started writing plays because the theatre had become disproportionately interesting to the world at large. I don't really know why it did, but I joined the paper in 1954 and started trying to write a play in 1960 because I was very happy being a journalist. I loved being a reporter and didn't have any other ideas about doing anything else really until, well, a couple of years went by and I began to take note of what was happening around me, for example, in the London theatre and the Bristol theatre. And clearly, plays were the thing to write at that time. 10 years earlier, I guess it would have been novels, and now it's novels again, I think.
If you were still a journalist and you were conducting this interview, what question would you ask of yourself?
Well, I'm not a self-analytical person, and it's not really in my nature. I think, just to sort of think about topic A, in case of you and I talking to each other, I would wonder why I just, went along with doing that one film and then didn't really take films seriously enough perhaps after that. And very seldom I had, as it were, even my own film. It was, I feel very ambivalent about my career as a playwright, screenwriter. I don't feel sorted about it at all. It's getting a bit late now, but I sort of perhaps feel that yeah, I think what I would ask myself is why. It's the question you asked me: why don't I try to write a film in the real sense of writing a film, rather than just going along with friends who are making their film and I'm just mucking about with it to help out? Why? Especially now, when there's so many ways of making a film, one should say, well, why don't you? Why don't you? I don't actually have a play to write at the moment. And literally, I don't have a space in my life to write a play, and I have no subject for a play. And possibly, after we've wrapped this, I should go away and try and think about working in film from a different starting point.
I'm going to just change the subject here for a moment. Where do you write? Arthur Miller wrote in a log cabin he built for himself, and where do you write?
I have a room in my house. I mean, I like writing in hotels. So occasionally I just go somewhere. I need to smoke and I need room service, essentially. That's all I need. As a matter of fact, it's much pleasanter to be at home with wife, family, and so on. But clearly, one ought to have a little more discipline than I have, because I don't actually shut myself away. When times are in crisis and I'm up against it with a deadline, then I do. But I'm pretty slipshod about the way I organize my life.
So you don't write every day? It's not.
No, I don't. I don't write every day. And I had a friend staying with us for the weekend, and he said, yes, he writes every day. And I just think, really? What happens to your in tray? I can't cope with mine.
You've commented on how much you cherish your solitude. Do you have solitude? Do you?
I've had a lot of times on my own, and I've never felt lonely ever. I like solitude. As a writer, I think a certain amount is necessary. I've always been bookish rather than active. So I make few demands upon the world as a writer, and I don't really, even if I'm writing about something factual and I need to see places and do things and find out what I'm writing about, I'm fairly casual about that as well. Very often I end up looking at places, rooms, monuments which I've been writing about but didn't really get to see until the play was finished. I think that's the attraction, actually. There's a certain sort of self-sufficiency about creating a play and, I guess, a film. A certain self-sufficiency. In other words, it caters to one's own distaste for making sudden movements. You know.
How would you best like to be remembered?
I suppose as a reasonable parent and husband, really. We seem to have got a long way from filmmaking and all that. I mean, maybe there wasn't that much to say about the filmmaking side of what brought us together. I should say it was actually a really nice time of my life, being with the film. And watching it the other day, I remembered what we did on our first day of shooting, where we were and what we were shooting. And I remember you coming up and saying, well, you've done your first movie scene, or at least take. And I sort of realized that, that there was a sense of occasion which I'd missed. I'd been too preoccupied and slightly nervous about what we were going to do that morning. But yeah, it was just, I'm sure I said this 10 years ago, but the fact that everything stays the way you leave it in a movie is something which makes It's very, very different from being in the theatre where nothing stays the way you left it.